Chapter 1, The Agreement. Dr. Sarah Chen had signed many documents in her life: student loan papers, apartment leases, her marriage certificate before the divorce, but none had felt as heavy as the stack of papers now sitting on the laminate table before her. The conference room smelled of industrial cleaning solution and recycled air. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with that particular frequency that seemed designed to induce low-grade anxiety. "Take your time reading through everything," the man across from her said. He'd introduced himself as Mr. Garrett, though Sarah suspected that wasn't his real name. He wore a gray suit that seemed deliberately unmemorable, and his face had the practiced neutrality of someone trained to reveal nothing. "We need you to initial each page and sign at the bottom of the final document." Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the first page. "Confidential, level Omega clearance" was stamped in red across the top. She was a neuroscientist, had been for 15 years, specializing in memory consolidation and trauma response. She'd published papers, given lectures, considered herself reasonably familiar with government research protocols. But this was different. This felt like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. The words on the page were dense, filled with legal terminology that seemed designed to obscure as much as clarify. Phrases jumped out at her: perpetual non-disclosure, criminal prosecution, surveillance protocols, psychological monitoring. Her mouth went dry. "Can I ask questions?" she said, looking up. Mr. Garrett's expression didn't change. "You can ask. I can't promise I'll answer. Not until you sign." Sarah felt a flutter of panic in her chest. She thought about her daughter, Emma, who was 7 years old and currently at her ex-husband's place for the week. She thought about her small rental house in suburban Virginia, her university position, her normal, ordinary life. What was she doing here? But she knew the answer. The offer had been extraordinary. 3 times her current salary. Access to resources she'd only dreamed about. The opportunity to work on research that could, they'd hinted, fundamentally change the treatment of psychological trauma. After years of scraping by on academic grants, of watching her most promising research stall for lack of funding, it had seemed like a miracle. "What happens if I don't sign?" she asked. "You leave. You forget this meeting ever happened. You never speak of it to anyone." Mr. Garrett folded his hands on the table. "And you go back to your life exactly as it was before." There was no threat in his voice, but Sarah heard it anyway. The implication that she'd be watched, that this moment would be recorded somewhere in a file with her name on it. That she'd already seen too much simply by being here. She began to read more carefully. The document outlined a program called Project Nightingale. She would be required to work at an undisclosed location for a minimum of 3 years, with the option to renew. All research would be classified. She would be prohibited from discussing her work with anyone outside the program, including family members, for the rest of her life. She would submit to regular psychological evaluations and, if necessary, therapeutic intervention, to ensure compliance. That phrase made her pause. Therapeutic intervention. What did that mean? "The participants," she said, pointing to a paragraph. "It says here we'll be working with human subjects who have experienced catastrophic psychological events. Can you tell me what that means?" Mr. Garrett was quiet for a moment. "People who've survived things that most people don't survive. Things that break them in ways that normal therapy can't fix. We're trying to help them. But the nature of what happened to them, where it happened, why it happened, that's all classified." Sarah felt cold. "Are these military personnel? Veterans?" "Some are. Not all." He leaned forward slightly. "Dr. Chen, I'm going to be frank with you. We approached you because you're one of the best in your field. Your work on memory reconsolidation therapy has been groundbreaking. But more than that, your psychological profile suggests you have the capacity to handle difficult situations with empathy and discretion. We need both." "My psychological profile?" Sarah's voice rose slightly. "You've been We vet everyone extensively. Yes. Mr. Garrett's tone was matter-of-fact. This is national security work, Dr. Chen. We don't take chances. National security. The words hung in the air like a weight. Sarah thought about the news she'd been watching lately. Disasters that seemed to come out of nowhere. Government officials speaking in careful euphemisms. The sense that there were things happening in the world that the public wasn't being told about. She picked up the pen. It was a cheap ballpoint, the kind you'd find in any office supply store. Somehow that ordinariness made the moment feel even more surreal. If I sign this, she said slowly, and I later decide I can't do it, that it's not what I thought it would be, can I leave? After the 3-year commitment, yes. But the non-disclosure agreement is permanent. Forever, Dr. Chen. You'll carry what you learn in that facility to your grave. Sarah thought about secrets. How they festered. How they changed people. She'd treated enough patients to know that the things we couldn't speak about had a way of consuming us from the inside. But she also thought about Emma. About giving her daughter a better life. About finally having the resources to do the work she'd always believed in. She began to initial the pages. One after another. 16 pages in total. Her hand moved mechanically, and somewhere around page 9, she noticed she'd stopped actually reading the words. She was just signing away pieces of herself, of her freedom, with each stroke of the pen. When she reached the final page, she hesitated one more time. Her signature would go here, beneath a paragraph that reiterated the criminal penalties for breach of contract. 25 years to life in federal prison. Complete financial ruin. The destruction of everything she'd worked for. Dr. Chen. Mr. Garrett's voice was gentle now, almost kind. You don't have to do this. But she did. She didn't fully understand why, but she did. Maybe it was ambition. Maybe it was the sense that she was being offered a chance to be part of something that mattered, something bigger than herself. Or maybe it was simpler than that, maybe she was just tired of struggling, tired of being overlooked, tired of watching less capable colleagues advance while she scraped by. Sarah signed her name. The pen lifted from the paper, and she felt the weight of what she'd done settle over her like a physical thing. Mr. Garrett collected the documents, sliding them into a leather portfolio with practiced efficiency. Welcome to Project Nightingale, Dr. Chen. A car will pick you up tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. Pack for an extended stay at a secure facility. You can tell your family you've been selected for a specialized government research position that requires you to live on site. Beyond that, say nothing. Do you understand? Yes, Sarah whispered. Good. He stood, and she realized the meeting was over. One more thing. From this moment forward, you don't exist in quite the same way you used to. Part of you belongs to something larger now. Try to remember that when things get difficult. He left without shaking her hand. Sarah sat alone in the conference room for several minutes after he'd gone, staring at her own hands as if they belonged to someone else. Outside, through a small window with reinforced glass, she could see the parking lot. Ordinary cars. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. She wondered if she'd ever be ordinary again. Chapter 2, The Facility. The car arrived exactly at 5 a.m., a black sedan with tinted windows and a driver who didn't speak. Sarah had barely slept. She'd spent the night lying awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she should call someone, her ex-husband, her sister, anyone, and tell them what she was doing. But the weight of the agreement sat on her chest like a stone. She'd already broken herself into before and after, and the after version had obligations the before version had never imagined. Emma had called the previous evening from her father's house, chattering about a soccer game and a lost tooth. Sarah had tried to sound normal, maternal, present. But her voice had felt hollow even to herself. "Mommy, are you okay?" Emma had asked, with that uncanny perception children sometimes have. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." I have to go away for work for a little while. How long? Sarah had gripped the phone tighter. I'm not sure yet. But I'll call you whenever I can. I love you so much. After they'd hung up, Sarah had sat on her kitchen floor and cried, wondering what kind of mother she was, what kind of person signs away years of their life for money and ambition and the promise of meaningful work. Now, watching the Virginia suburbs give way to rural countryside through the sedan's window, she felt numb. They drove for 3 hours, moving steadily west into increasingly isolated terrain. The driver never spoke, never turned on the radio, never acknowledged her presence in the back seat. She tried to mark landmarks in her mind, a particular gas station, a church with a distinctive steeple, but after a while everything began to blur together. Finally, they turned onto an unmarked road that cut through dense forest. A gate appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, manned by guards in dark uniforms who checked credentials she couldn't see. Then another gate. And another. Each one taking them deeper into a place that didn't exist on any map. The facility itself was brutalist in design, all concrete and sharp angles, built into the side of a mountain like something that had erupted from the earth rather than been constructed on it. There were no windows she could see from the outside. No signs. Nothing to indicate what purpose this place served. The car stopped at a reinforced entrance. The driver finally spoke, "Someone will meet you inside. Leave your phone and any personal electronics in the vehicle." Sarah's hand instinctively went to her purse, where her phone sat. Her lifeline to Emma, to the outside world. For how long? Permanently. You'll be issued a facility phone for approved communications. She felt a wave of vertigo. This was real. This was actually happening. With shaking hands, she removed her phone, her tablet, even her fitness tracker. She placed them in a plastic bin the driver held out to her. The entrance doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. A woman stood waiting, younger than Sarah, with severe features and dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a white lab coat over dark clothing, and an ID badge that read Dr. Maya Reeves, senior psychologist. Dr. Chen. I'm Maya Reeves. Welcome to Nightingale. Her voice was crisp, professional, but there was something in her eyes, a weariness, maybe, or a warning. Follow me, please. They walked through corridors that seemed to descend deeper into the mountain. The walls were the same unmarked concrete, broken only by doors with numeric keypads and small windows of reinforced glass. Sarah caught glimpses through some of them, medical equipment, observation rooms, spaces that looked like therapy offices but with additional features she couldn't identify. You'll have a private room in the residential wing, Dr. Reeves said as they walked. Meals are communal. There's a gym, a library, common areas. We try to make it as comfortable as possible, given the circumstances. Given what circumstances? Sarah asked. Dr. Reeves glanced at her. You'll be briefed this afternoon. But I'll tell you now, this isn't like any research position you've held before. The work we do here, the people we work with, they'll challenge everything you think you know about human psychology and resilience. They stopped at an elevator that required both a key card and a retinal scan to operate. As they descended, Sarah counted at least 5 floors down, Dr. Reeves continued. Most people who come here struggle in the first few weeks. Some leave before their contract is up, even knowing the financial penalties. Others adapt. A few thrive. She paused. I'm telling you this because you need to understand, what we ask of you here isn't just professional. It's personal. It costs something. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor that looked almost residential, carpet instead of concrete, softer lighting, actual artwork on the walls. But there was still something clinical about it, something that whispered facility rather than home. This is your room. Dr. Reeves opened a door to reveal a space that looked like a modest hotel room. Bed, desk, small bathroom, a chair by a window that showed only darkness. Sarah realized the window was artificial, a screen displaying a recorded view of trees and sky. You'll receive your facility phone and ID badge after orientation. Dinner is at 6 in the main commons. Don't be late, Director Walsh likes to meet new team members personally. Dr. Reeves handed her a folder. This contains your schedule for the first week, facility protocols, and emergency procedures. Read it carefully. When do I meet the participants? Sarah asked. The patients? Something flickered across Dr. Reeves's face. Not quite fear, but close. Soon enough. First, we need to prepare you. What you're going to see, what you're going to hear from them, it's not like normal trauma work, Dr. Chen. These people survive things that shouldn't be survivable. Some of them experience things that according to our current understanding of reality, shouldn't be possible. Sarah felt her skin prickle. What does that mean? It means, Dr. Reeves said quietly, that by the time you leave this facility, whether that's in 3 years or 30, you'll understand why the non-disclosure agreement was so extensive. Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. Some secrets are kept not for national security, but for collective sanity. She turned to leave, then stopped at the threshold. One more thing. You'll hear crying sometimes, at night, in the residential wings. Some of the long-term staff have nightmares. It's normal. Try not to let it disturb you. Then she was gone, and Sarah was alone in her windowless room with its fake view of a false sky, holding a folder full of protocols for a job she was beginning to suspect she should never have accepted. She sat on the bed and opened the folder. The first page was titled, Psychological Preparation for Exposure 2 Class, for Traumatic Testimony. Her hands began to shake again, and this time, they didn't stop. Chapter 3, The First Session. The orientation lasted 3 days. Sarah sat through presentations on security protocols, medical safety procedures, and something called cognitive contamination prevention that made her increasingly uneasy. They showed her videos, sanitized, clinical footage of interview sessions with people who looked haunted in ways she'd never seen before. Eyes that tracked things that weren't there. Voices that broke mid-sentence as if severed by invisible hands. Dr. Reeves led most of the training. You'll notice we don't use traditional diagnostic categories here, she explained during one session. PTSD, dissociative disorders, those labels become meaningless when the trauma source falls outside conventional experience. We've developed our own classification system. Sarah raised her hand. What do you mean by outside conventional experience? The room went quiet. The other 3 new staff members, 2 psychologists and a psychiatric nurse, all looked at Dr. Reeves with the same question in their eyes. You'll understand after your first session, Dr. Reeves said. Words don't really prepare you. Experience is the only teacher here. On the 4th day, Sarah was finally cleared for patient contact. She dressed carefully that morning, trying to maintain some semblance of professional normalcy, dark slacks, a blue blouse, her university ID lanyard before remembering she couldn't wear it here. Everything about her old life had to be left behind. Dr. Reeves met her outside interview room 7. Through the small window, Sarah could see a man sitting at a table. He looked ordinary, maybe 40 years old, graying hair, the kind of face you'd forget in a crowd. He wore standard facility clothing, gray sweatpants and a white t-shirt. His hands were folded on the table, completely still. This is patient 247, Dr. Reeves said. Real name is classified, like all of them. He's been here for 8 months. Cooperative, mostly stable, but he still has episodes. Your job is to continue the narrative therapy protocol, let him tell his story, document everything, and help him process the experience within our framework. What happened to him? Dr. Reeves's jaw tightened. He was part of a deep-sea research expedition that went wrong. Very wrong. He's one of 3 survivors out of a crew of 27. The other 2 survivors are in different facilities. They're never allowed to communicate with each other. Why not? Because when they do, their stories start to synchronize in ways that are problematic. Shared delusions that become more elaborate, more consistent. It's better to keep them separate. Dr. Reeves opened the door. I'll be watching from observation. If you need to stop the session, just say the word intermission. Someone will come immediately. Sarah stepped inside. The room was sparse, 2 chairs, a table, recording equipment mounted discreetly in the corners. The man looked up as she entered, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or relief. The look of someone who'd been waiting to be heard. "Hello," Sarah said, sitting down across from him. "I'm Dr. Chen. I'm here to listen to you." "They all say that." His voice was rough, underused. "But do you really want to hear it? Once you know, you can't unknow it. That's what they don't tell you when you sign up for this work." Sarah kept her expression neutral, professional. "I'm here because I want to understand what you experienced. Whatever that is." Patient 247 laughed, a sound without humor. "We were mapping the Mariana Trench. Cutting-edge submersible, state-of-the-art sensors. We were supposed to be down there for 6 hours, taking samples, recording data. Standard operation." He paused, his fingers beginning to drum against the table in an irregular rhythm. "But we found something. Or it found us." "What did you find?" His eyes fixed on hers with sudden intensity. "Promise me something first. Promise me you won't try to make this make sense. Don't try to rationalize it or fit it into what you think you know about the world. Because that's what broke most of the others. The need to understand something that exists outside understanding." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "I promise to listen without judgment." At 35,000 feet, the sensors started picking up sounds. Not whale songs or tectonic movement, this was different. Patterns. Almost like language, but wrong. The frequency made your bones vibrate, made your teeth ache. Our pilot wanted to surface immediately, but the mission commander overrode him. Said we needed to investigate. Patient 247's hands had stopped drumming. Now they gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "We found a structure. Down there in the deepest part of the ocean where nothing should exist except pressure and darkness. It was massive, Dr. Chen. Geometric. Made of something that our instruments couldn't identify. And it was old. Older than human civilization, older than our species. We could see symbols on it, carvings that hurt to look at. Some of the crew started bleeding from their noses just from seeing it through the monitors." Sarah's clinical training told her this was a delusion, a trauma response creating false memories to cope with some other horror. But something in the man's voice, in his absolute conviction, made her doubt. "What happened next?" she asked quietly. "It opened." His voice dropped to a whisper. "God help me, it opened like an eye, and something looked back at us. Not at the submersible, at us specifically. Each of us individually. It knew we were there. It knew we were separate beings. And then..." He stopped, his breathing becoming rapid. "Take your time," Sarah said, though her own heart was racing. Then people started screaming. The biologist, Dr. Martinez, she started clawing at her face, saying she could see everything, every moment of her life happening at once, past and future collapsed into a single eternal present. The engineer went catatonic, just stared straight ahead while blood ran from his ears. "And I felt it too, Dr. Chen. I felt something trying to crawl inside my mind, something vast and ancient and utterly indifferent to whether I lived or died or went insane." Patient 247 was trembling now, but he continued. "We surfaced. Emergency protocol. But most of the crew didn't survive the ascent. Some had strokes. Some just stopped. Their hearts quit beating for no medical reason. Like they'd decided to die rather than carry what they'd seen back to the surface. The 3 of us who made it, we're the unlucky ones. We have to remember. We have to live with knowing what's down there, waiting in the dark. Sarah sat very still, processing what she'd heard. Every instinct told her this was fantasy, trauma-induced psychosis. But the detail, the consistency, the absolute conviction in his voice. "How long have you been telling this story?" she asked. 8 months, like the doctor said. But I told it to the military first, right after they pulled us out of the water. Told it to psychiatrists, neurologists, people with clearances higher than God. And they all said the same thing: it's classified. It's too dangerous to acknowledge publicly. So they send us here, to places like this, where we can tell our stories to people who'll never be allowed to repeat them. He leaned forward, his eyes desperate now. "You asked if you could help me process this. But how do you process the knowledge that humanity isn't alone, that there are things in this world far older and stranger than we ever imagined, and that we're not allowed to warn anyone? How do you live with that kind of silence, Dr. Chen? How do you carry a truth that would break the world if it was ever spoken aloud?" Sarah had no answer. She sat there, looking at this man who might be delusional or might be telling the truth about something so terrible that the only response was institutional silence. And she realized that Dr. Reeves had been right. Some secrets were kept not for security, but for sanity. Chapter 4, Breaking Point. 3 months into her time at Nightingale, Sarah had interviewed 17 patients. Each story was different, yet they all shared a common thread: encounters with phenomena that defied explanation. A soldier who'd seen something emerge from a cave system in Afghanistan that made half his unit vanish without trace. A pilot who'd flown through airspace where the laws of physics seemed negotiable. A researcher from Antarctica who'd found something frozen in the ice that was still, impossibly, alive after millions of years. The stories accumulated in Sarah's mind like sediment, layer upon layer of impossible testimony delivered with unwavering conviction. She documented everything, wrote careful reports using the facility's specialized terminology, and attended weekly sessions with Dr. Reeves to monitor her own psychological state. "You're showing signs of what we call narrative absorption," Dr. Reeves told her during one evaluation. "It's common. You start to see patterns between the testimonies, start to wonder if maybe they're not delusional at all. That's the dangerous part, Sarah. When you begin to believe. What if I should believe them?" Sarah heard herself say. What if these people are telling the truth? Dr. Reeves set down her tablet and looked at Sarah with something like pity. Then you have to ask yourself what it means to live in a world where these things are real but never acknowledged. Where people suffer in silence because the truth is too destabilizing to speak. Is that really a world you want to accept? But acceptance wasn't a choice anymore. It was happening to Sarah whether she wanted it or not. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in late October. Sarah was assigned to patient 412, a woman named, or rather, formerly named, Dr. Lisa Huang. She'd been a quantum physicist working at a government laboratory in New Mexico. According to her file, she'd been at the facility for 2 years, the longest of any current patient. She was also classified as high risk for cognitive contamination. When Sarah entered the interview room, she found a woman who looked far older than her 42 years. Dr. Huang's hair had gone completely white. Her hands shook constantly, a fine tremor that medication couldn't control. "You're new," Dr. Huang said immediately. "I can tell by your eyes. You still think this is normal psychology. You still think we're sick." Sarah sat down, unsettled by the woman's directness. "I'm here to help you process your experience." Process. Dr. Huang laughed bitterly. Such a clinical word for something that broke reality itself. "Did they tell you what I did? What we all did? Your file says you were part of a classified research project. An accident occurred." Accident. Dr. Huang's tremor intensified. "We didn't have an accident, Dr. Chen. We succeeded. That was the problem. We opened a door that should have stayed closed, and we saw what was on the other side. Do you know what happens when you observe something that exists outside of observable reality? When you measure something that predates measurement itself? Sarah waited, her pen poised over her notepad. We were testing quantum entanglement on a macroscopic scale. Trying to transmit information faster than light by exploiting quantum correlations. It worked. God help us, it actually worked. But we didn't just entangle particles across space, we entangled them across time. And something else was waiting there, in the quantum foam, in the space between moments. Something that noticed us noticing it. Dr. Huang's voice had taken on a hypnotic quality, and Sarah found herself leaning forward despite her training. 12 people were in the lab that day. 7 died instantly, just collapsed, their brains showing activity patterns that shouldn't be possible. The remaining 5 of us, we saw it. We saw the substrate of reality, the code underneath existence. And once you see that, once you understand that everything we think of as solid and real is just probability waves collapsing into temporary coherence, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to believing in the solidity of the world. Sarah's hand was shaking now too, though she tried to hide it. What happened to the other 4 survivors? 2 killed themselves within a month. 1 is in a psychiatric facility in Montana, completely unresponsive. And then there's me, sitting here, telling my story to the 10th or 12th psychologist they've sent, knowing that none of you can help because the problem isn't in my mind. The problem is that my mind saw too much truth. Dr. Huang. Lisa. I'm not a doctor anymore. I'm a witness. A living testament to knowledge that humanity isn't ready for. They keep us here, people like me, because they're terrified of what would happen if we talked. If we shared what we know with the public. Imagine if everyone knew that reality is just a consensus hallucination, that consciousness itself might be the only real thing in the universe, and that there are other consciousnesses out there, older and stranger than ours, that can manipulate that consensus at will. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a fundamental crack in her understanding of her role here. Why are you telling me this? Why cooperate with them at all? Lisa's eyes filled with tears. Because I have a son. He's 15. They've promised me that if I comply, if I participate in their protocols and take their medications and tell my story over and over to people like you, they'll leave him alone. They'll let him grow up normal, never knowing what his mother discovered. Never carrying this burden. Her voice broke. That's the real price of knowledge, Dr. Chen. Not madness or death, but watching everyone you love live in comfortable ignorance while you drown in terrible truth. Sarah sat frozen, her clinical detachment completely shattered. She thought about Emma, about her daughter's innocent questions and simple happiness. What would she sacrifice to protect that? What secrets would she keep? I need to stop, Sarah whispered. Intermission. But Lisa reached across the table and grabbed Sarah's wrist with surprising strength. No. You need to hear the end. Because you're one of us now, whether you know it or not. The moment you walked into this facility, the moment you listened to your first patient and felt that seed of doubt, of belief, plant itself in your mind, you became a witness too. You can't unknow what you've heard. You can't unbelieve what part of you has already accepted as true. The door burst open. Dr. Reeves and 2 orderlies rushed in, pulling Lisa's hand away from Sarah's wrist. But the damage was done. Sarah could feel it, the weight of accumulated testimony, the pattern of impossible truths that suddenly seemed less impossible, more like pieces of a puzzle she'd been unconsciously assembling for months. As they sedated Lisa and led her away, she called back over her shoulder, "We're all prisoners here, Sarah. The only difference is whether we know it yet." Sarah remained in the interview room long after everyone had gone. She looked at her hands, at the red mark where Lisa had gripped her wrist, and felt the full weight of what she'd done by signing that agreement. She'd thought she was joining a research program. But she'd actually volunteered to become a keeper of secrets that poisoned everyone who heard them. Her phone, the facility-issued one with its limited, monitored access, buzzed with a message from Emma, *Miss you mommy. When are you coming home, asterisk? Sarah stared at the words until they blurred. Home. What a simple, impossible concept that had become. She began to type a response, then stopped. What could she possibly say? Chapter 5, The Weight of Silence. The final year of Sarah's contract arrived with the weight of inevitability. She'd stopped counting the patients, there had been too many, their stories bleeding together into a tapestry of impossible testimony. She no longer flinched when someone described things that couldn't exist. She no longer reached for conventional diagnoses or tried to fit their experiences into the neat categories she'd learned in graduate school. Dr. Reeves had been right. She'd become one of them. A witness. A keeper of secrets. Emma was 11 now, growing up in a world Sarah had helped keep safe through silence. Her ex-husband had remarried, and Emma seemed happy in the pictures she sent through the facility's filtered communication system. Sarah had missed 3 years of her daughter's life, reduced to a voice on monitored phone calls and carefully worded emails that revealed nothing about her real work. The day her contract ended, Director Walsh summoned her to his office, a place she'd only been twice before. He was an older man, gray-haired and weathered, with eyes that had seen far too much. His office was surprisingly sparse, containing only a desk, 2 chairs, and a single photograph of a woman and 2 children that Sarah suspected were long gone from his life. Dr. Chen. 3 years exactly. He gestured for her to sit. You've been one of our most consistent researchers. Your psychological assessments of the patients have been thorough, compassionate, and scientifically rigorous given the unusual parameters. Thank you, Sarah said, though the praise felt hollow. I'm authorized to offer you a contract renewal. 5 more years, with a substantial salary increase. Your daughter could attend any school you choose, we'd arrange it. You'd have more clearance, access to some of our other programs. He paused. You've proven you can carry the weight. Sarah looked at him, this man who'd spent decades in this facility, managing secrets and witnesses and the careful machinery of institutional silence. She saw what she would become if she stayed, someone hollowed out, sustained only by the belief that the burden they carried protected others from unbearable knowledge. What happens to the patients, she asked. After we treat them, after they tell their stories and process their trauma within your framework, do they ever leave? Walsh's expression didn't change. Some do. After extensive monitoring and conditioning. We have protocols for reintegration. But the truth is, most don't want to leave. Out there, they're alone with what they know. Here, at least, they're among people who believe them. That's not treatment. That's imprisonment. It's both, Walsh said quietly. And it's mercy. You've heard enough stories now to understand what happens when these truths leak out. Mass panic. Psychological breakdowns. Religious hysteria. Our job isn't just to treat traumatized individuals, it's to maintain the cognitive stability of civilization itself. Sarah felt the full weight of those words. She thought about Lisa Huan, still in the facility 4 years later, still telling her story to new researchers, still sacrificing her freedom for her son's ignorance. She thought about patient 247 and his deep-sea nightmare, about the soldier and the pilot and all the others whose encounters with impossible things had brought them here. I can't stay, she said finally. I can't do this anymore. Walsh nodded as if he'd expected this. Then you leave. You return to your life. But you know the terms, Dr. Chen. Not a word. Not to your daughter, not to your colleagues, not to therapists if you seek help for your own inevitable nightmares. You carry it all in silence until you die. I know. Do you? His voice hardened slightly. Because I've seen researchers break after they leave. Try to publish anonymized accounts. Try to warn the public. Try to convince themselves that the truth matters more than the consequences. And I've seen what happens to them. Federal prosecution. Professional destruction. Sometimes worse. The system protects itself, Dr. Chen. Always. Sarah stood up, her legs unsteady. I signed the agreement. I'll honor it. See that you do. Walsh opened a drawer and removed a folder. Your exit paperwork. You'll be debriefed over the next week, given a cover story for your employment gap, and released. We'll be monitoring you, of course. Periodic check-ins. Psychological assessments. Standard procedure for all departing personnel. For how long? Forever. The word hung in the air like a sentence. Sarah left the facility on a gray morning in November. The same black sedan, the same silent driver. But this time she was leaving, driving away from the concrete structure buried in the mountain, carrying 3 years of impossible knowledge that she could never share. She retrieved her old phone from storage. It felt like an artifact from another life. When she turned it on, there were hundreds of messages, some from Emma, some from concerned friends and family who'd accepted her vague explanations about classified government work but never stopped worrying. She called Emma first. Her daughter's voice, deeper now, more mature, brought tears to her eyes. Mom. Mom, are you finally done? Can you come home? Yes, sweetheart. I'm coming home. What was it like? The work you were doing. Sarah looked out the window at the forest passing by, thinking of all the things she could never say. Important, she said finally. But I can't talk about it. I'm sorry. That's okay, Emma said with the easy acceptance of childhood. As long as you're coming back. But Sarah knew she wasn't really coming back. Not all of her. Part of her would always remain in that facility, in those interview rooms, listening to testimonies of impossible things. She'd carry those stories like stones in her chest for the rest of her life, feeling their weight with every breath. The sedan reached the highway. Normal traffic surrounded them, people going to work, running errands, living their ordinary lives in an ordinary world. They didn't know what existed in the dark places, in the deep ocean, in the spaces between quantum states. They didn't know about the people who'd seen too much and paid the price for witnessing. Sarah envied them their ignorance even as she protected it with her silence. Years later, lying awake at 3 a.m. while Emma slept peacefully down the hall, Sarah would sometimes wonder if she'd made the right choice. Not in leaving, she knew she had to leave. But in going there at all. In signing that agreement. In becoming complicit in the machinery of institutional silence. She'd helped people, she told herself. She'd given witnesses a place to speak their truths, even if those truths could never travel beyond concrete walls and classified files. That had to mean something. That had to be worth the wait. But on the worst nights, when the testimonies played through her mind like a film she couldn't stop watching, Sarah understood what Lisa Huang had meant. The real torture wasn't in knowing terrible things. It was in knowing them alone, in carrying truths too dangerous to share, in watching the world go on in blessed ignorance while you drowned in knowledge you could never speak aloud. The survivors were told to stay silent. And so they did, until silence became its own kind of prison, until the secrets they protected became indistinguishable from the secrets that had broken them in the first place. Sarah Chen carried hers to the grave, just as she'd promised. Just as they all did.